If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall discuss Harrowings The Shadow, the spiritual devil on the shoulder of every Wraith in the Shadowlands. We will also discuss the frightening spectres that so many become. You have returned. I almost thought I scared you off. It has been a while since I, Dr. Frederick Phoenix, co-founder of the Phoenix Institute, managed to scare away a potential underworld explorer. Then again, I am hardly the frightening fellow myself, unlike what we discovered in Ashburn Manor. What did we find? Oh, you needn't worry about that. I doubt you'd believe me anyway. Just know that it was big, ugly, well-spoken, was rather scary. Far more so than most ghosts we encountered, hence our different meeting spot. The cemetery seemed quite apt, does it not? I see you look puzzled. Yes, what we found in the manor was more frightening than some ghosts we have discovered. Most look like, well, I suppose one might describe as a spiritual paler version of our mortal physical counterparts. Some of these wraiths are not so pleasant to look upon, creatures we have come to call spectres. But before I start talking about that, we have to recap and expand upon what we know about the shadow that governs each and every wraith in the Shadowlands, for there is indeed a connection between the two. You probably have had that voice in your head that tells you to do that naughty thing. The little imp on your shoulder is all too real for wraiths, for the shadow has a will of its own and is part of the wraith, bent on the self-destruction of the wraith. It will bribe, cajole, threaten and take control of the wraith's psyche to follow through with its selfishly seductive and sadistic goals to pull the wraith into oblivion. The shadow has its own gifts, known as thorns, that the wraith can employ to help them out in a pinch, but with a cost. The price is always high when you make a deal with the devil. It is an enemy every wraith endures, one that can never be vanquished as it toys with your emotions and secrets. It knows you oh so intimately. In case I was not clear, only the wraith can hear their own shadow. No one else can hear its snidey remarks and offensive comments it makes about the wraith's friends. The wraith may even respond aloud, forgetting only they can hear it. It is almost a taboo topic to discuss the shadow with other wraiths, at least according to our research. It will do everything and anything it can to drag the wraith down into oblivion, as already discussed, but it is not as straightforward as a one-way ticket to oblivion. Shadows are destructive, yes, but not suicidal. To cause total annihilation of the soul would be far too easy. The shadow relishes in the slow struggle it causes its wraiths to suffer, and every victory has over the psyche. It will fake the emotions of the psyche if needed, timing its fights appropriately. It is not the destination that is important, but the journey. It hates the wraith, and it will happily take its time to constantly remind its wraith nothing hates them more than it does. No amount of drugs or booze could silence the shadow permanently. One does not simply ignore their shadow forever. Of course, one cannot simply indulge in all its desires either. Detaching yourself from the living world does not do your psyche any favors. A statement that rings true for all aspects of life and unlife, don't you think? Bad things happen to wraiths who are forcibly removed from aspects of their former life. If their connection is weakened through the means of losing a fetter, passion, or their corpus, a harrowing begins to occur as the wraith's mind begins to crack and break, a process involving a painful dragging to the underworld that is indeed encouraged by the shadow. The Phoenix Institute has collected many ancient records that state Harrowings were meant for wraiths to come to terms with their passions and fetters, to teach them to grow beyond them, to challenge their shadow, and to transcend without it. A cathartic experience it may well have been. You may work out how more malevolent forces can warp and twist one peaceful discussions into horrifying puzzles designed to destroy and damn the wraith. Transcendence has been replaced with survival using only what you had on your person to aid you. If it wasn't apparent, it is a torturous psychodrama starring the Wraith with the Spectres as the supporting cast, but more on them in a little bit. Harrowings empower a shadow, forcing the Wraith to pummel into oblivion and sever their ties with their fetters and make other bad decisions, a type of harrowing called a targeted harrowing. For the Wraith to overcome it, it requires great mental strength and willpower, and the cards are very much stacked against them. The Wraith Wraith, I mean. The subconscious of the Wraith dictates their own harrowings, making them their own personal nightmares. Every horrible ex, all your abusive relatives, your bullies and more appear before you, forcing the Wraith to embrace the harrowing's cryptically horrible methods to escape. There is no other way to escape. No use of Arconi will allow you to cheat the system. You are in the labyrinth, and you are the playthings of Spectres. But how do Spectres get involved exactly? Well, they communicate with your shadow and pull you in via a nihil. Well, this little hole sucks you in at a blinding sudden speed, and Spectres play out memories for you. Doppelgangers, a type of Spectre, take on the forms of whoever and whatever comes and how they do so in this dreamscape. If the Wraith is the star of the show, the Spectres and Shadow are the directors. I'm sure you can imagine the sort of horrible things that can occur here. Nightmares are unpleasant, but we have the free will to end their barbaric logic by simply waking up, and that is not possible for the Wraith here. Now, should the Wraith succeed at working out their harrowing, they leave the same way they arrived, rapidly through a nihil, somewhere near where they originally were. Sometimes, a Wraith can be spawned near their fetter or haunt, which are places Wraiths reside. Places we refer to as haunted or creepy are called such for a reason, you know, but this is a conversation for another time. Those that succeed but lack fetters are said to arrive on a calm area of the Tempest, washing up on the banks of the Great River. Both are also topics from other times. Those who fail end up in a more hostile area of the Tempest, left to be battered by its winds. There are, however, circumstances where the Wraith is simply destroyed by oblivion, such as failing a destruction harrowing. These are rare types of harrowing, when the Wraith has very little passion left, and is thus so numbed from emotions that there is actually no point for them to live on, from their perspective at least. These can also occur when they have sustained too much damage to their corpus and are on the brink of death, so to speak. We have also collected information that some have been able to create self-inflicted harrowings as well. Through what I have told you, you could imagine the Shadow as the evil twin within oneself. That is simply not the case. They have different voices and personalities. Some even name themselves just to simply make themselves stand out and detach themselves from their Wraith. Problem is, as much as neither party wants to admit it, Shadow and Wraith are not as distinct and separate as they would like. Their personalities have often been branded into various archetypes such as the Delver or the Abuser. There are many to interpret, but you can go through our many records on them should that be something that interests you. The Shadow can also take control of the Wraith, a process called catharsis. If a Shadow becomes too powerful, they can take over the Wraith permanently, turning the Wraith into a Spectre. Its humanity and former identity are replaced by pure evil, forgetting its old tethers, friends and ideals, which keeps it from transcending, where the Wraith, not the Spectre, is fundamentally about accepting their death. Spectres are minions of oblivion, creatures of unbridled emotion, monsters filled with dark rage and intensely complex melancholy. They exist only to inflict pain on others, causing a great extinction of reality in the process. Yes, my fellow explorer, you are right to eschew them as sadistic, terrifying creatures. Some might even call them pathetic, comparing them to the typical woe is me teenager who thrives only on hatred. Never underestimate them though. Spectres are never not dangerous. You probably get that by now, but it gets worse. To that end, I shall use this moment to warn you that some of what I'm about to share with you is particularly morbid, shall we say, especially if you have a weak stomach or the death of children is a particularly sensitive topic for you. It should be to most people, but that is not the point that I'm making here. You can walk away now, Explorer, and that is totally fine by me. I will have no grudges against you whatsoever. But I could see that you've chosen to stay, and I have a very brief history lesson to give you. You see, not all the Spectres existed as humans. A strange concept perhaps, but remember, we are dealing with the underworld, and nothing is as it seems. We know that the Spectres were first born, or perhaps I should say created, at the creation of the Shroud, a separation between life and death, the divide between the Skinlands and the Shadowlands, an event referred to as the Sundering. These Spectres who were birthed from oblivion are a type of Malfean known as Neverborn, bestial creatures that only respect fiends whose powers are equal to their own, who attack anything in their territory. The large primordial grotesque creatures would burrow beneath the Shadowlands and create the Labyrinth, which acts as both home and hunting grounds. The Malfeans are the reasons why the winds of the Labyrinth howl and shriek violently as they and other Spectres battled Charon's armies who choose to keep them in oblivion. Who is Charon? Who is Charon? Who is Charon? Only the most important figure in Western Wraith society. I could waffle in great detail about him, but now is not the time for that, Explorer. We're here to talk about spectres that many Wraiths unfortunately become. There are actually some things they have in common. They share the same incorporeal appearances and fight of a different part of themselves. Wraith fight their shadow, and spectres tackle the moral psyche. Mortals that become Wraiths who become spectres do so in similar fashions. Both emerge from cocoon-like structures. Wraiths burst form from an ectoplasm sheath known as a cowl. Both Wraith and Spectre also possess a death sight, whereas Wraiths see everything as dying landscapes. The death sight of spectres is already tainted by sights of death, dirty darkness, and so forth. We believe this is down to the fact oblivion is more present in spectres than it is in wraiths. This increased amount of oblivion manifests in other ways. Spectres have something known as a death sense. Mortals who are close to death or wraiths with strong shadows shine like bright beacons to spectres, even if it is on the other side of the shroud. Allegedly. That said, we found that spectres find it more difficult to access the skinlands, our world, thank goodness. They have difficulty interacting and influencing us mortals as well. We also heard that vampires burn strongly with oblivion, but you probably don't believe in such things. The existence of vampires, I mean. With this in mind, you would think that spectres share the sharp senses of wraith counterparts. Quite to the opposite, actually. They would be deafened by the howling winds of the tempest if they did. An impromptu experiment we conducted once at the Institute found their senses were slightly less than the average human. What they do have that no wraith has is the shared hive mind. Spectres can communicate telepathically to each other, some better than others. We believe it also allows the voices of oblivion to instruct its puppets, like ants responding to the call of their queen. To spectres, oblivion is a force to be encouraged, not feared, so they can find peace with the destruction of the world. Most don't care what follows, they just want their suffering to end. Anything you have heard from myself, one of my colleagues, or any source of information regarding oblivion as a thing to avoid, they can only be staved off with trust and dedication to a certain faith are all true. Spectres know this, and do what they can to destroy such ideologies, encouraging cynicism, hopelessness, and a lack of faith in governments and gods wherever they go. To some Malthians, oblivion is their god. Others view themselves as gods. Either way, oblivion is a way of life, a lover, torturer, and general. But make no mistake, Explorer, they are all monstrous. The spectres, I mean, not just Malthians. Sure, many look like twisted monstrosities, formed by oblivion and their own self-inflicted mutilations. You can use your imagination to envision some truly horrific designs, for lack of a better word. But they are not simplistic, mindless killers of an underworldly entity. Remember I said many were once human, and much of our idiosyncrasies are passed down onto them, mainly a complex social order, one that does not thrive on the fears of slavery and domination like their wraith foes, which is a conversation for another time. Primarily, it is the fear of segregation, splitting the wraiths by caste. Their system is not upheld by violence and coercion, but the intensity of the individual dark passions which determines how those within their caste view them. Yes, Explorer, spectres have a tight caste system. To cover all bases, most spectres serve as functioning nihilists, passive in their outlook but not hopeless, which to other spectres makes them total losers of the labyrinth. These are the aptly named nothings. They are the most human-like in their appearance. Many of these are ex-mortwites, poor unfortunate souls who died under such violent circumstances that they become spectres instantly, without spending any time in the Shadowlands. We have learned that the New Fallen, as they are occasionally called, have been drastically increasing in numbers since the 5th Great Maelstrom, a great underworld storm, but are considered to be socially inferior to doppelgangers. Studies have shown us they are remarkably adept at navigating the Tempest and superb warriors against Stygia and the Dark Empires, a series of necropoli in Asia, which we'll discuss in a separate night, including their own unique spectres. A rare Mortwright variant known as the Haint or Bay Cock, don't laugh. Haints are defined not by their death, but by their life. Before their death, they had been reduced to an almost inhuman lifestyle whilst among the quick, the mortals I mean, and in the Shadowlands, they were reborn as something much like shades. Almost universally victims of famine, atrocity, or genocide, Haints appear as they did in life. The thing that sticks out most about their appearance Harrowings is their lack of eyes that burn like black fire. Yes, it is very difficult to hide and does burn away at their corpus, their body. Below the Mortorites are the Shadow Eaten, otherwise known as the Doppelgangers, who are exactly as they sound. Wraiths who have been consumed by their shadow, possessing many of the skills and arcanae they once had. These Spectres are able to impersonate more important wraiths as agents for the previously mentioned Malfians. Our research informs us they are the only Spectre breed to perform haunts, luring souls to such negatively charged spaces. Doppelgangers are also the only Spectres with fetters, which is why they are so low on the hierarchy of Spectres. As such, their exposure to the Shadowlands is far more limiting. It makes them weak by other Spectre standards. To make up for it, they also destroy and tamper with the fetters of other wraiths. Things get a little more complicated here, as Doppelgangers have their own hierarchy, which is dependent on their focus. For example, those that choose to play with fetters are known as spiders, whilst the spies are, well, spies. These differ somewhat from goads, who befriend wraiths and subtly lure them to the dark side. Ironic that their title lacks the subtlety of their task. A more subtle version of this is the Banshee, which uses emotional manipulation, dripping toxic thoughts and emotions into the poor wraith's ear. If you want less subtlety, go to a leech, who siphon off corpus and pathos of other wraiths. An equally finessed doppelganger role is the Double, which essentially has them assume the appearance of another and cause trouble. I suppose a variant of this would be the Actor, who are the ones that partake in the Harrowings that we discussed earlier on. Riders focus on the Skinlands and cause the mortals to do strange things through the mastery of the puppetry arcanae, whilst oddities are considered by many some of the more dangerous of the Spectres due to their abilities to trap wraiths in equally strange and dangerous scenarios. Just as peculiar is the doppelganger type we believe is referred to as a Conjurer, which has the Spectre attack the wraith in their sleep and unleash said nightmares at dramatically inappropriate moments. Finally, you have Assassins, who do exactly what you imagine them doing, in addition to feeding off the fear and anger that attacks generate. Regardless of faction, all doppelgangers are less substantial than the other Spectre types. It is said you can tell if you're speaking to a doppelganger if you look them in the eyes, as you are said to see their shadow dance in their eyes. Slightly above the doppelgangers are Appariations, Spectres who have shown the first signs of loving Daddy Oblivion. Good grief, who added that to my notes? Anyway, these begin to look pastier as they wait in the labyrinth or work in the Shadowlands for their fetters to break. I mentioned before in our previous conversation that fetters can be loved ones, which can be children. Unfortunately, the Wrath of Oblivion does not discriminate, and children, specifically those who are 10 and younger, may become Spectres. These are striplings, the aptly named Never Lived. You can understand how this is quite rare. Assuming they die in such horrific circumstances, the Might of Oblivion just tears them apart. Understandably, it was during the Industrial Revolution and again during the wars of the 20th century where their numbers began to grow at an uncontrollable rate. It was actually some 600 years prior, during an event called the Children's Crusade, when they started to assert themselves as a caste of their own right. Or to be more precise, one that should be feared and respected. Their goal is to bring more children into oblivion, appearing as imaginary playmates, encouraging children to play with power sockets, drink Tide Pods, run into roads, etc, etc. To other wraiths, they are disfigured fat atrocities or rancid tapeworms or worse. Once the Mortorites, Doppelgangers and Appariations can no longer pass as wraiths, they become the Transformed, or the Nephrax. This is no concern to the emissaries of the Malfians, as they revel in displaying an outwards appearance as twisted and repulsive as the vile darkness that lies within. If you're not fearing the Nephrax, which are the third most important in the caste system of Spectres, allow me to introduce you to the Children of Oblivion, the Shades, who are respected and feared by Spectres. They become Spectres after losing to their shadow during a harrowing. They can also become a Spectre by being devoured by the Tempest or swallowed by Oblivion during a maelstrom. During any of these, their personality and their intellect is stripped away, turning the Spectre into a howling beast. As a result, they make perfect shock troops as they seek corruption and annihilation, leading any charge when Spectres attack en masse. They really are the stuff of nightmares, appearing as scaled dragons and monsters of our legends. Claws, gaping maws, you name it, they have them. Don't go head to head with with one of these, Explorer, you will lose. Saving what most of us in the Institute would refer to as the worst till last are the Malfians, the god kings of the underworld. They are the mightiest and most deadly of all the Spectres who have lairs deep within the labyrinth that came about during the Sundering. They rarely leave, and when they do, it is to cause insatiable levels of destruction and chaos on scales none of us could possibly comprehend. Some spread their chaos by making themselves gods. You may have heard some stupid humans who worship them. Many of these Malfians are Neverborn, which I mentioned earlier on to you, were the ancient spectres that were created during the Sundering, creatures that rarely wake up from their ancient slumbers. This is for the best, as they are said to be unstoppable engines of consumption. Needless to say, said consumption is felt all across the underworld. Most spectres, however, undergo missions set by the Onceborn or the Kabbalists, as older records of ours state. These Malfians are Malfians by status, as they have literally earned and ate their way into that position, fighting over Onceborn for power in the labyrinth. In terms of hierarchy, they are below the Neverborn. There are some shades that try to become Onceborn, but lose their mind to oblivion. These become Hecatonkyle, I'm assuming that's the pronunciation anyway. These become a little more than massive, deformed brutes devoid of any intellect capable of attacking several adversaries at once. They share their Onceborn size and power, but none of the mastery of Arconi. That's all gone. Finally, there is the enigmatic Pacify that are neither Shade nor Onceborn, who are said to be immune to the hive mind. We have instances of them in our findings that refer to them as the Saints of the Shadow Eaten, Ferrymen of Oblivion, and the Black Reapers. Very little of them is known, save for the ferrymen who traverse the labyrinth, but that could be a conversation for another time, as there would be a lot to unpack regarding the culture of Spectres. It is nasty, to put it plainly. Spectres are horrid agents of oblivion that devour souls in the underworld. They know that their existence is limited. Many embrace and celebrate it and try to end it as quickly as possible, throwing themselves suicidally against the legions of Stygia, a large necropolis, a city of the underworld. They are entities that really do live on the very edge and exhibit no fear. Others are more patient, waiting for oblivion to reclaim their souls in its own time. These attitudes also show themselves when Spectres hunt and possibly play with their food. Regardless of whether they are hard and fast sort of Spectres or more methodical, all of them are evil, implacable, menacing creatures. With all of this considered, the bits of research I have chosen to omit from you for now, we at the Phoenix Institute believe there is no supernatural entity that can rival the malice of Spectres. They are entropy incarnate and are malevolent as they come. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.